Hello everyone and welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah here. We're holding in Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav. We'll be learning today Mitzvah Hashem Daf Gimel Amid Beis. We're continuing to learn Hilchas Chol HaMoed, and we have been discussing the halachas of taking a haircut or shaving on Chol HaMoed, and we pick up in Siman Taf Kuf Lamed Aleph Sif Ches, top line on Gimel Amid Beis. Says the Mechaber, Kol Adam Muter Lital Safa B'Chol HaMoed. Anyone is permitted to cut or trim their mustache on Chol HaMoed. Says the Mishnah Berurah in Eis Katan Chaf Aleph. Lital Safa, everybody is permitted to cut or trim their mustache. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Bein b'misparayim, whether you do this in the normal way that it was done with a scissor, ubein b'tar, or whether you do it with a razor. Doesn't matter. You don't have to. There's two chidushim, I think, over here. One is that you're not required to do it with any kind of shinui. You're allowed to trim or cut your mustache on Chol HaMoed. You don't have to employ a shinui. So you can do it with a misparayim. You could do it in the normal, traditional way with a scissor. Ubein betar, or you could do it with a razor. I think there is also a chiddush over here in your Yeredeya, which is, I think there are those Rishonim that hold that you're not allowed to cut the mustache with a razor, and the Chavetz Chaim says over here that you could do this bein b'misparayim, bein b'tar. Va'afilu eina ma'akeves ha'achila, and you're allowed to do this. You're allowed to trim your mustache on Chol HaMoed, regardless of whether or not it's interfering with your eating. See, when it comes to the halachas of the 3 weeks, you're allowed to trim your mustache even when you're not allowed to shave, if it's ma'akeves ha'achila. If you find that the hairs of the mustache are getting into your mouth and they're interfering with your eating, then you're allowed to trim it. On Chol HaMoed, it doesn't have to be interfering with your eating. You're allowed to trim your mustache even if it's not. Now, why are you allowed to do this? So if you take a look in the Sharet Tzion, Ois Katan Tezvav, the Chavetz Chaim explains why this is mutter. Let's remember, what's the whole reason taking a haircut or shaving is asur on Chol HaMoed? The whole reason is, it's a gzera. We want to make sure that you don't come into Yom Tov while you're menuvel. We want to make sure that a person will take a haircut and take a shave before Yom Tov. Therefore, the Chachamim said, it's asur to take a shave or take a haircut on Chol HaMoed. If you would be allowed to do it on Chol HaMoed, they were afraid you wouldn't make it your business to do it before Yom Tov. You'll be very busy on Erev Yom Tov. You'll say, all right, I don't have time for a haircut, I don't have time for a shave, I'll take a haircut and a shave on Chol HaMoed. But now that it's asur on Chol HaMoed, you'll realize you have to do it on Erev Yom Tov. The Chavetz Chaim is going to say over here in the Sharet Tzion that doesn't apply to trimming your mustache. Says the Sharet Tzion, Dal Yidei Gidol Safa La Yeh Menuvel. The fact that your mustache is a little bit long, that doesn't make a person menuvel. That doesn't make a person look disheveled. And therefore, Therefore, the Chazal didn't force you to do it on Erev Yom Tov. Taking a shave, taking a haircut, there's a requirement that you do that on Erev Yom Tov to make sure that you should not come into Yom Tov kishehu menuvel. Therefore, you're not allowed to do it during Chol HaMoed. But that doesn't apply to the trimming of your mustache. Nevertheless, tzarich laimar, we also have to say, we're walking a very interesting fine line over here. On the one hand, we're saying that not trimming your mustache does not make you menuvel. It doesn't make you disheveled. And since it doesn't make you disheveled, there's no requirement that you do it on Erev Yom Tov. And since there's no requirement that you do it on Erev Yom Tov, there's no isser, there's no prohibition against you doing it on Chol HaMoed. On the other hand, trimming your mustache is classified as a tzarech hamoed. It is classified as something that you're doing for the purposes of the moed, and it is called a yipoi v'tikun haguf. It is considered something that you do to make yourself look nicer and to improve yourself. So it does fit that bill, and therefore you're allowed to do it on Chol HaMoed because it's a tzarech hamoed. But it's not so much of a tzarech that if you don't do it before Yom Tov, it's considered that you're disheveled. And the Chavetz Chaim explains over here, further in Sharatzianois Katan Tesvav, the Ilavachi, because if it would not be called Yipoi V'Tikkun Haguf, Yia Aser Mitam Aleches Goizeis B'Chol HaMoed. If it's not considered a tzarech hamayid, if it's not considered that you're making yourself look better and you're improving yourself for the purposes of the mayid, then it would be aser because you'd be doing the malacha of geizes shaloi l'tzarech hamayid. So it must be that it is considered yipoi v'tikkun haguf, but not to the extent that if you don't do it before Yom Tov, it's considered that you went into Yom Tov Menovel. Okay. Now we continue in the Mishnah Berurah is Chaf Aleph. If somebody has some type of a skin condition on his scalp, shchin literally means blisters or boils on his scalp, mutar legaleach haseyar, he's allowed to cut his hair on Chol HaMoed, afilu b'tar, even with a razor. V'ayin b'bir halacha, and the bir halacha discusses this in greater detail. Umutar lahakiz dam, you're allowed to do bloodletting on Chol HaMoed, shekarin kep zetzin. I don't know exactly what this kep zetzin is. From the description that the Mefarshim give, it sounds like it's talking about what we call cupping. But cupping doesn't involve bloodletting. So I'm not exactly sure what this means. But this is some kind of procedure that you're allowed to do on Chol HaMoed. Now, why is this mentioned over here? So I think the chiddush over here is, and we learned this previously in Siman Taf Samech Ches. I'll read to you. In Siman Taf Samech Ches, in Sif Yud. So that's in Chelik Hey, on Daf Ayin Zayin Amid Beis, Taf Samech Ches, Sif Yud. The Ramah says, V'nagu shaloi lahakiz dam b'shum erev Yom Tov. The minig is that you do not do any type of bloodletting on any erev Yom Tov, ve'ein l'shanois, and we should not depart from that minig. Now, why is that we don't do bloodletting on erev Yom Tov? So there's a very interesting Mishnah Berurah over here. The Mishnah Berurah in Ois Katan Lamed Ches says, Shaloi lahakiz, the minig is not to do bloodletting on any erev Yom Tov. The be'erev Shvuas yotza shade the shmoi tavuach. On erev Shvuas, a shade came into creation, and his name was Tavuach. V'ilu loy kiblu Yisrael as HaTorah. If Klal Yisrael Chas v'Shalom would not have been makabel of the Torah on Shvuas, havi tavach lahu lebisrayu v'ledamayu. This shade would have killed the Yidden. Literally, the words mean here, he would have butchered their flesh and their dam, their blood. V'gazru rabbanon, and therefore the Chazal decreed, al kol erev Yom Tov, on any erev Yom Tov, not to be makiz dam, mishum erev Shvuas, because of erev Shvuas. So somehow, this shade that came out into the world on erev Shvuas, that has something to do with harming people through their flesh and through their dam, somehow being makiz dam, bloodletting, on erev Shvuas, I guess put somebody into some level of a sakana because of this shade. And since, therefore, the Chazal didn't want you to do bloodletting on erev Shvuas, and because they didn't want you to do bloodletting on erev Shvuas, they didn't want you to do bloodletting on any erev Yom Tov, not just erev Shvuas. Now he mentions over here in this Mishnah Berurah in Taf Samech Ches, he also mentions this kep zetzin, and he says yesh matirin, that you could be matir on other erev Yom Tovs, milvada Hoshana Rabbah shehu yom hadin, but you shouldn't do it on Hoshana Rabbah, which is erev Shmini Atzeres. You shouldn't do this kep zetzin on Hoshana Rabbah either, because Hoshana Rabbah is a little bit of a yom hadin. People say the Gemar din is on Hoshana Rabbah, so since it has a certain aspect of a judgment day, of a yom hadin, we don't do anything that involves any kind of level of sakana. Okay. Now let's go weiter. Now we go to the Ramah. Says the Ramah on the second line here on Gimel Amud Beis up in the Shulchan Aruch. Haga, afilu b'farhesia, you're allowed to trim your mustache on Chol HaMoed, even if you do it b'farhesia, even if you do it in public, because there's nothing wrong with letting somebody see that you're trimming your mustache. There's nothing wrong with that. Further, says the Ramah, you're allowed to shampoo or scrub your hair on Chol HaMoed, and you're allowed to comb your hair on Chol HaMoed. Afal pisha meser seyar, even if it might pull out hairs. Ve'en bazeh mishum giluach, and there's no isser over here of giluach, of taking a haircut or shaving. And the reason for this is simple. The reason is that, again, me'ikar hadin, really taking a haircut or shaving, is a malacha that should be mutter on Chol HaMoed, because it's a tzarech hamoed and it's not a maisa umun. So really, there's no reason why this should be aser. Me'ikar adin, it's mutter. The only reason it's aser to take a haircut or take a shave is because of the gzeira. We want to make sure shelo yikanes l'moed menuvel. You shouldn't come into the Yom Tov disheveled. That gzeira doesn't apply to pulling out one or two random hairs that might happen because you're combing. We're not afraid that if we allow you to take a shower and shampoo your hair on Chol HaMoed, or we allow you to comb your beard on Chol HaMoed, that means that Erev Yom Tov you're not going to take a haircut or take a shave. So the gzeira doesn't apply to these isurim. Says the Mishnah Berurah, nice cut on Chav Beis, Giluach, there's no problem of taking a haircut involved in shampooing or combing your hair. V'chein kol rechitza muter. And so too, any kind of rechitza, any kind of washing yourself on Chol HaMoed is mutter. And again, we don't make a gzeira that you can't take a shower on Chol HaMoed because we're afraid if you're allowed to take a shower on Chol HaMoed, you might not take a shower on Erev Yom Tov. It's normal to do rechitza. It's normal to wash yourselves several days in a row. So, okay, a person will take a shower on Erev Yom Tov. Even if he's going to take a shower on Chol HaMoed, he's still going to take a shower on Erev Yom Tov. So again, the gzeira does not seem to be appropriate, and therefore rechitza of any kind is mutter on Chol HaMoed. That concludes Siman Tov Kuf Lamed Aleph, and now we go to Siman Tov Kuf Lamed Beis. Netilas tziparnayim, cutting your nails b'Chol HaMoed. Excuse me, on Chol HaMoed. Uboy Beis Seifim, and here we have two Seifim. Says the Mechaber here in Sif Aleph, Mutter lipol tziparnayim, you're allowed to cut your nails, bein diyad, whether it's your fingernails, bein deregel, whether it's the toenails, and afilu b'misparayim, you can do this even with a scissor. You don't need to employ any kind of shinui. You could do it in the perfectly normal way using a scissor. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Eis Katan Aleph, afilu b'misparayim, you could do this even with a scissor. V'chol shekain, certainly basakin, using a knife, oy b'yad, or by pulling the nails off with your hand, or b'shinav, or by biting them off, the mutter. Certainly in those methods it would be mutter, because then you would be employing a shinui. It's mutter even without a shinui. It's definitely mutter if you employ a shinui. Now, if you take a look in the Bir Halacha, Dibra Maskal, bein diyad, bein deregel, the Mechaber said you're allowed to cut your nails, whether it's your fingernails or your toenails. Says the Chavetz Chaim in the Bir Halacha, Ritzarna Loimar, the Chiddush that the Mechaber is telling you when he mentions your toenails is Afilu deregel, even toenails, Deloy mo'is im yiskadel, that's not considered mo'is, it's not considered disgusting if your toenails are long. Nobody sees your toenails. Your toenails are in your socks and your shoes. So why are you allowed to do it on Yom Tov? Gam kein mutter, it's still mutter. Okay, now we go to the Ramah. However, the Ramah says here, Haga, aval yesh machmirin v'isrin. However, there are those who rule stringently, and they say that you're not allowed to cut your nails, either fingernails or toenails, on Chol HaMoed. V'chein hu haminig lahachmir shaloi litlan. And indeed, says the Ramah, the minig is not to cut the nails on Chol HaMoed, bein besakin, bein b'misparayim, whether you use a knife or whether you use a scissor, meaning even if you employ a shinoi, even if you do it with a knife and not a scissor, you're still not supposed to cut them on Yom Tov. Im loy l'tzarech mitzvahs tefillah, if not for a woman who's doing it l'tzarech mitzvahs tefillah, a woman who has to go to the mikvah on Chol HaMoed, and she has to cut her nails as part of her chafifa, as part of her hachanas, then she's allowed to do it. Shenoitlan kedarkan b'chayil, then she's allowed to cut her nails in the perfectly normal way, the same way she would always do it on a typical weeknight. So, we had over here the Mechaber. The Mechaber said you're allowed to cut nails. The Ramah says the minig is to be machmir and not to cut nails. Let's see the Mishnah Berurah is cutting bays. Yesh machmirin. There are those who rule stringently. Why? What's their rationale? Says the Chavetz Chaim, the Sovereign, these opinions hold, and he brings this down in the Shar Tzion from the Lavush. The Lavush says that over here also we have room for the same gzera that we make by a haircut. We don't allow you to take a haircut on Chol HaMoed because we want to make sure you're going to take a haircut before Yom Tov. We don't want you to come into the Yom Tov kishu manovel. So to here, we want to make sure you cut your nails on Erev Yom Tov. We don't want you to come into Erev Yom Tov with long nails. So we don't allow you to cut the nails on Chol HaMoed because we want to make sure you're going to cut the nails Erev Yom Tov. V'yachtechem be'erev haregel, you should make sure to cut them on Erev Yom Tov. In the Dirshu footnote number 1, it says over here, how about somebody who, let's say, has an ingrown toenail, or somebody has a nail that's otherwise causing him pain? The way the Dirshu footnote puts it is, Va'adam hasayvel mitzipayrin beragloi, somebody who's suffering from a toenail, hamafriya loy linoilis naloi, that's preventing him from wearing his shoe. To me, that seems to be talking about an ingrown toenail. You have a painful ingrown toenail, and putting on your shoe is very uncomfortable because the shoe is putting pressure on the nail. Das hagoyin Reb Nissen Karelitz, and now it's atzal, sheyesh lahakel l'chaydcha, you can be makel and you're allowed to cut it. Kevan shagzera shaloi lital tzipranayim b'moyed, since the whole gzera, according to these machmirim, according to these stringent opinions, the whole gzera against cutting nails on Chol HaMoed is kedei shelo yikanes menuvel l'moyed, so that you should not come into the Yom Tov when you're menuvel. Loi shayches elik yishenoitel tziparnav l'saknon. That only applies to a prohibition of cutting your nail in order to make it nice. We don't want you to cut your nails on Chol HaMoed to make them nice because we want to make sure that you do that before Yom Tov. But over here, that's not what this person is doing. He's not trimming his toenails to make them nice. He's trimming an ingrown toenail because he's in pain, because it's causing him suffering. It's not appropriate over there to make a gzera. We don't allow you to cut an ingrown toenail because we want to make sure that you make your nails nice and trim on Erev Yom Tov. The gzera doesn't apply. This doesn't apply to somebody who's cutting one nail because of a different tzarech. And v'yesh lo tzaref lekachas hachito yishalogazu klal al netilas tzipranayim b'moyed. And on top of that, we have the sheet of the Mechaber who says that you're always allowed to cut nails. So we have a combination over here. On the one hand, we have the sheet of the Mechaber who holds it's always mutter to cut nails on Chol HaMoed. And even according to the Machmirim are only Machmir because they feel that the Gzeira that applies to haircuts should apply to cutting nails also. But that doesn't apply to the cutting of an ingrown toenail, and therefore Reb Nissen Karelitz says this would be mutter. Now we continue the Mishnah Berurah here, rice cutting base. V'chol hani du mutarin legaleach hanizkarim lamayla b'simin tavkuf lamed aleph. All of the people that we learned in Siman tavkuf lamed aleph, that were considered einsim, people who it's not their fault that they weren't able to take a haircut on Erev Yom Tov. Somebody who got out of prison, he wasn't able to take a haircut on Erev Yom Tov, and therefore we said he's allowed to take a haircut during Chol HaMoed. All of those individuals, mutar and lital tziparnayim, they're also allowed to cut their nails on Chol HaMoed. V'im nitalan me Erev Yom Tov, and not only that, let's say somebody did cut his nails on Erev Yom Tov, but he happens to have nails that grow quickly. So he cut his nails on Erev Yom Tov, and now he wants to trim them again on Chol HaMoed. Mutter litlan b'Chol HaMoed. He's allowed to cut them on Chol HaMoed. Why? We didn't see this in Tavkuf Lamed Aleph, but even when it comes to taking a haircut or taking a shave, we're noyig that even if you took a haircut or a shave on Erev Yom Tov, you're not allowed to take another haircut or a shave on Chol HaMoed. But there are those shittas that hold, If you did take a haircut and a shave on Erev Yom Tov, so you did what you were supposed to do on Erev Yom Tov, now you're allowed to take another haircut or another shave on Chol HaMoed. There are those that hold that way. We don't hold that way. We don't paskin that way. Kanal b'siman tafkof lamed aleph siv beis. Yeah, we did learn this. We learned this Isser in Tafkof Lamed Aleph Siv Beis. We said afilu im gilach kaidem moed. Even if you took a haircut before Yom Tov, you're still not allowed to take a haircut during Chol HaMoed. But there are those shittas that hold that you are allowed to, even by a haircut. So certainly when it comes to cutting the nails, where we have shittas like the Mechaber who hold that you're always allowed to cut your nails on Chol HaMoed, so certainly if you cut your nails on Erev Yom Tov, you're allowed to cut your nails on Chol HaMoed. Dirshu footnote number 2 says over here, V'adam shenitel tziparnav kama yomim kaidem Yom Tov. Let's say somebody cut his nails several days before Yom Tov. V'shuv lo nishar ma'litel be'erev Yom Tov. Then he took a look at his nails on Erev Yom Tov. He wanted to cut his nails on Erev Yom Tov, but there was nothing to cut. His nails weren't long enough that they required trimming. And now on Yom Tov they grew to a length where it's already appropriate to cut them. The Aruch HaShulchan says this person is allowed to cut them on Chol HaMoed. Since there was no need for him to cut them on Erev Yom Tov, the Gzeira that we don't allow you to do something on Chol HaMoed because we want you to do it before Yom Tov, because we don't want you to come into Yom Tov Kishu Menuvel, doesn't apply to him. He checked his nails on Erev Yom Tov, they weren't Menuvel. They weren't long enough that they required a cut. That's why he didn't cut them. So now in Chol HaMoed, says the Aruch HaShulchan, he's allowed to cut them. Okay, now let's go. We read this already. You're according to the Ramah, according to the more stringent opinion, you're not allowed to cut your nails on Chol HaMoed, whether you did it with a sakin, whether you want to do it with a knife or with a scissor. Says the Mishnah Berurah, cut in Gimel. Aval b'yadav ay b'shinav mutter. But if you want to break your nail off on Chol HaMoed with your hand, or you want to bite it off with your teeth, that's mutter. So interesting. If you forgot to cut your nails on Erev Yom Tov, and now you can't cut them on Chol HaMoed because of this Ramah, you're allowed to rip them off with your finger or bite them off with your teeth. And in that vein, mentions the Chavetz Chaim here, Hanoitel tziparnav b'shinav, somebody who bites off his nail, ein behem mishum mius, that's not considered something which is usher, which is prohibited to do mishum mius, because it is disgusting. Eis Katan Dalet, the Ramah said that a woman who has to do her preparations to go to the mikveh, she's allowed to cut her nails on Chol HaMoed, and she could do it shenoitlan kedarkon b'chayil. She could cut them in the typical way, the way it would be done during the week. Ritzayna loymar, what the Ramah means to say here when he says noitlan kedarkon, she could do it in the normal way. He means afilu al yidei atzman, that she could do it herself. Vein tzarech al yidei nachris, she doesn't have to ask a non-Jew to do it for her. Kamoila inyan isha shehi avela, which is the halacha that we find by a woman who's an avelis. If she has to go to the mikveh, she has to ask a non-Jew to trim her nail. And the reason she's allowed to do this on her own is because, again, we have the shita of the Mechaber who holds that you're always allowed to cut your nails on Chol HaMoed. Now we go to the bottom line in the Shulchan Aruch, Siv Beis, Kol Refuah Mutter B'Chol HaMoed. Anything that's required for you to do for refuah purposes is mutter on Chol HaMoed. Whatever malacha you need to do for refuah is mutter on Chol HaMoed. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Hainu shemutter lasai safilu malacha gemura l'tzarech refuah. You're allowed to do any kind of malacha, a real bona fide malacha. You're allowed to do for the purposes of refuah on Chol HaMoed. Va'afilu l'chayla she'ein by sakana, even if you're doing this for a chayla she'ein by sakana, somebody who's not in any kind of danger. Habi Yom Tov aser, but on Yom Tov itself, refuah is aser. Afilu lishta is davar shehu mishum refuah, even to drink something for refuah purposes. Gzera atu shchikas samemonim. This is something that we learned at length in Hilchos Shabbos and applies to Yom Tov too. We have the gzera of shchikas samemonim. We're afraid that if you do something for refuah purposes on Shabbos or Yom Tov, you might come to grind up samamonim. You might come to grind up herbs to make some kind of a medicinal preparation. So, and that would be an Issa Daraisa. So to prevent you from doing that, they prevented you from doing any kind of refuah. Atu Shchika Samamanim, and he brings this down from the Magen Avram. Okay, we're going to stop over here. A little bit of a short share today. And Mirza Hashem, tomorrow we will continue with Siman Tuf Kuf Lamed Gimel. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. The schus of limud HaTorah should stand ganz Klal Yisrael in good stead. The Rabbeinu Shalom should be megan on ganz Klal Yisrael. The Rabbeinu Shalom should send refuah shalema l'chol Yisrael. I'd like to mention specifically Yisrael Menachem ben Itel Genendel, a good friend who's in the hospital in the ICU. Mendel Shmuel ben Miriam Leah, Yitzchak ben Chana Rachel, to give Menachem Aryeh ben Dina Yehudis. They should all have a refuah shalema b'seich shar chayei Yisrael. Be well.